Thank you, Clara, for coming to Binghamton University and to the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. And so I guess I would like to start off with if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, so good morning, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Clara Barat. I am Spanish from origin. I was born in Madrid, but I actually live in Sao Paulo in Brazil. I work as the Director for Educational Policies at the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, which is an international NGO that works in the field of genocide and mass atrocity prevention worldwide.
And so what is your role in working with the Auschwitz Institute with AIPR?
So the Auschwitz Institute, it's an organization that works all over the world with government institutions and government officials to help design policies that are crafted to prevent mass atrocity and genocide. We do this with working with public officers from many different departments, and this is done mainly through a regional approach. So AIPR has offices, headquarters are in New York, but we have offices in Poland, in Uganda, Kampala, in Buenos Aires, and in Bucharest, in Romania. Normally, these offices head our regional programs. So there's a Latin American program, East Africa program, Mediterranean Basin Network, Mediterranean Basin program. And the program I do is actually different in nature because it's not so much focused in the region or the place in which we work, but actually on the theme. The idea is actually to include educational policies, and that refers mainly working with government institutions that have education competence. Of course, obviously, ministries of education, but not necessarily only, to help them or work with them, raise awareness about the importance of working with a mass atrocity lens from that perspective. So it is basically work that focuses in longer term or upstream prevention, which is also something that AIPR generally believes on as the key prevention strategy, to focus in the longer term and approach to prevention.
So if you could tell me a little bit more, so you mentioned about upstream prevention, and so for some of the people that would be watching this may not necessarily be intimately aware of upstream, downstream, midstream. So if you'd be able to briefly mention how does your work fit within that framework?
Yeah, well, so something that has been developed in the last years, and it's something that it's not that old, but it's kind of recent work that has been more and more developed, is this idea that mass atrocity doesn't happen from the night to the day. It's not that suddenly people start killing each other. That's not really how these events happen. There's a lot of research from institutions, academics, but also practitioners that look into kind of how the process of mass atrocity unravels and happens. And actually to be able to understand what are the factors or risk factors that can appear longer term before these things happen, and how we can actually intervene in different phases or different moments according to that situation. For AIPR, actually, we understand that the best kind of prevention is actually that one that happens in the longer term, because as things go more and more complicated, it's more costly and more difficult to actually halt things from happening. This is one of the reasons why we actually have an educational policies program, because education, it's strictly speaking a longer term prevention strategy. I mean, you cannot educate people while killings are taking place. That wouldn't be effective at all. So it's actually a longer term investment that works in the creation, in reduction of risk factors, but also in promoting resilience factors that would make societies much more inclusive, plural, diverse, kind of building trust among communities, so to ensure that there's never a moment in which we will arrive there. So that is why for us it's very important to focus on this work. And for me particularly, it's very interesting because there's many organizations that do this kind of education work, and we can think about human rights education, democratic citizenship education, peace education, Holocaust education, even transitional justice focused education. But and these organizations normally focus in developing methodologies and like ideas and policies, but something that I think it's particularly unique of AIPR is that actually we do this in an organization that works with other government institutions. So we see that educational policies are part of broader policies and broader frameworks, especially looking into interministerial cooperation and just having a broader perspective of what that entails. And that is also very unique. As I was telling you, we work in a regional approach, but I can work in any country that we are invited to or that we have already some programming going. I don't have that regional limitation. I actually can work with my colleagues in different places. And currently I'm actually developing 2 projects in Brazil and El Salvador, in Latin America, very much related to our programming in that region. But I am already starting to consider, we are discussing about possibilities of also taking this work and what we've been learning to other parts and other countries in which we are doing work.
So a little bit more on that piece, if you'd be able to describe some of the projects, the work that you are partaking in for working with these interministerial government, within the governments, within the ministries, but also other projects that you may be working on with communities.
Yeah, so basically the Educational Policies Program, which is the program that I am responsible for, does 3 different things. The first thing is that we work with governments and we provide technical assistance or collaboration or discussion to help them create policies, programs, curricula, reforms that actually will have that prevention component in the societies in which we are talking about, which is very different from one place to the other, what the needs and the situation is. The second one is that we also try to promote collaboration, worldwide collaboration with organizations that have similar mandates to us, and this can be academic centers, but also other NGOs that are working in similar fields. So I do devote a lot of time in trying to connect with groups and learn from what other people are doing and having this global perspective of what's going on in the different areas of expertise. As I was telling you, there's different ways you can approach this topic through education. And the third thing we do is that precisely because of our very specific nature, which is not that it's just unique, but it's what we are, and what the kind of work that we do, I also devote some time, and as much as possible, to promote research, to know better how we can do this work better. So assess better what we are doing, but also design our interventions in a manner that it's much more impactful and more successful and makes more sense. There's 2 characteristics of AIPR that I think are very important as an organization. First, this idea that we focus in this longer-term prevention approach, which is really what we think is the basis of prevention work. Of course, it's not the only one, but it's an approach that it's strategic in many reasons, and also the fact that we work with governments. So it is not that common for an NGO to actually try to work on these issues from building partnerships with governments. It was out of this work and all the people that we've already been working with that it was more and more common, or we were hearing more and more that they wanted help with education. So for them, when they were thinking, okay, now I want to bring back to my country after our trainings, or when we started a discussion with us, how can I contribute to bring this prevention lens to my country? For most of them, it was, I want to work with the Ministry of Education. I really think we should try to promote programs in the education realm. So it was out of that conversations that AIPR felt more and more the need to develop a program of this sort, which would break with this regional approach. It would be different. And we started launching a program as not an experiment, but our starting point and also a way of developing how this program would look like, working with Latin America, where we have a very strong program that has been helping create and consolidate what it's the Latin American Network for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, which is a network of governments in Latin America that it's an international forum of discussion, cooperation around these issues. We started working with them with the idea of crafting a project, and for us there was 2 things that were very important when thinking about this project. First of all is that context is very important. So there is not a formula, and I think this is always the case with any kind of policy or law, anything you want to build. that every context is very particular, but I think it's even more so the case when you talk about culture and like education, the public sphere, because this relates very much to identity issues, community, how people interrelate to each other. So we were very aware that we needed to build projects that started bottom up and that actually made sense to the context. And that goes very well in hand with the idea that AIPR doesn't have solutions for problems. We don't know. I mean, we have the knowledge about what is mass atrocity prevention, what is this field, what works, what doesn't work, like general knowledge, but we don't have the solution to go to any place and say, oh, this is what you have to do to prevent mass atrocity. That wouldn't make sense. Wouldn't be right, but wouldn't make sense, because actually that's not how things work, and we know that very well. So our idea was actually to design a project that would go to this. We had capacity to work in 2 countries to begin with. It was the countries that were chosen through a very long selection process were Brazil and El Salvador. And our idea was to create kind of like a broad consultation process in which we would have 3 different or 4 different types of people in that table. First, institutions, and we were working with our partners, the ones that invited us to work, but also other institutions that would be relevant from an education perspective, like child protection institutions or things like that. We also wanted to have in the table, or thought it was important to have civil society organizations that deal with issues that are relevant in that societies. So depending on what the place is, what the groups, what are the problems, to invite these organizations. And then of course the educational community. And that we understood in very broad sense, in like thinking about organizations that do education work, but also teachers and students and schools, and actually the people who really are doing that kind of work. So we organized a methodology to kind of guide through this process. There was only 2 kind of like general guidelines, which was like something that had to do with prevention and something that would be able to become a public policy in the longer term, in the idea that AIPR was not there to sustain a program, but actually to help create a program that would be then stay. So that was back in 2016 we started. We still are working in both countries. It was a very long, interesting program process for me, and we ended up developing completely two different projects in both countries. So in El Salvador, with very strong support of the Ministry of Education, which was already starting to be interested in these topics, we helped develop a material that was to look into the legacy of the civil war that isolated the country for 10 years in the late 80s and early 90s. And something that hadn't been taught officially in the curricula in the 25 years of democracy and peace. So there was no materials, there was no information, there was no methodologies that teachers could use to bring this topic safely to the classroom. And there was also a component of peace education, because El Salvador is a very violent country. There's a gang phenomena, youth gang, that actually is very pervasive, and this is actually also a consequence of the conflict in a way, like how the conflict was transforming a different type of violence. So it is also linked, which is interesting from an educative perspective, to make students relate phenomena, but also provide schools with tools to deal with this phenomena as it comes to the school, because obviously schools are places in which everything from society comes and reflects. We launched that material in an event in which the Minister of Education was present. They were doing a reform of the social science curricula at the time, and they said that this was going to be one of the topics that was going to be taken seriously, and we're now working with them to train teachers and make this material accessible. In the case of Brazil, it is a very different context. We didn't have such a direct link with the Ministry of Education, but Brazil is a federal country, so actually the Ministry of Education is more in charge of providing broad policies and guidelines, but competences on education occur more at the state level. So in Brazil, 2 years ago, when we started the consultation, it was a moment of very strong social polarization, race of hate speech, and while you had the frameworks in place that would ask the school system to develop democratic citizenship education, human rights education in the classroom, there was a lack of methodologies and there was a lack of training for teachers to actually be able to do this, or to do this in an empowering manner. So it was a very long consultation process. We decided that in this case we would develop a methodology to actually bring these topics in the classroom. So this is a methodology that aims to work throughout the school year. We train teachers to be able to use it and then accompany them in the process of developing this in the schools. We've been working with 7 schools last year. We had like 620 students that finalized the project. It was 15 teachers we work with. This year we're going to work with 60 or 70 teachers. I don't know yet because it kind of like keeps growing. And it's going to be around 20 to 25 schools. So I don't know yet how many students we're going to reach because we let the schools decide how many classes they want to do the project with. But it could go up to 5,000 or something like that. And at the same time, we're also creating like a model for replication, start entering in other states. We're currently working in Sao Paulo and Brasilia and trying to actually institutionalize this in the country.
So you mentioned both talking about specifically working with teachers, as well as research and assessment. I'd be curious, for faculty that are looking here at Binghamton or at other universities across the United States and abroad that are looking to integrate an atrocity prevention lens within their classroom and within their research across different disciplines. Mm-hmm. What sort of advice or steps or kind of comments that you would have on that?
Something that I've been learning through all these years that I've been working with education, and not only by reading, but actually by going to classrooms and talking to students, which is something I never thought I was going to do, is that an important characteristic for learning about these topics is that you have to have a motivation. It is not something that you can just study because you have to study. First, it's a difficult topic. And second, it's a topic that it's not only about knowledge, but it also implies skills, it also implies emotions, attitudes, values. So I think it's fundamental to try, especially when you think about, for example, how to bring this into the classroom, to make sure that you do it in a manner that it's relevant to the students, so that you talk about things that resonate them, or that they will be able to identify, and starting from that, kind of trying to move forward. So, for example, like, if you are like, and again, depending on the context, you want to sensitize the students about here in the U.S. About these topics. And of course, the Holocaust is a very powerful example. I mean, there's many things that resonate, and here in the States, I mean, there is a very clear connection. But maybe for students, this is something that is too far away, that, they think it was so much in the past, that they are not aware of like all the underpinnings of World War II. And actually, there may be other episodes in which the United States has been involved, or in which they know people that may have participated, that will help them start understand what is the importance of these topics and how they can relate to them. So I think there is a lot of room to be creative and like look for things that actually students will have questions, and not just come there and impose, oh, this is something important, you have to learn about this, because it normally doesn't work. And of course, there's things that you need as a teacher or as a professor to include in the curricula, because it's not that the students just have to make what they want to study, but like how you enter into that may require to think about how to introduce these topics. I would say that for research, it's actually something similar. You have to find the place where these things connect to what you are actually interested in.
And so, talking about both of these things has made me wonder. I didn't ask you yet. How did you get into this line of work? What was your pathway to arriving into this?
I've been talking a lot about this these past days. It's funny because it's kind of like rethinking, well, why am I here? Actually, I was a philosophy student back in college, and that's what I liked. I was passionate about philosophy, and I wanted to be a professor at university. At the same time, I was a concerned citizen. Like, I was always aware of the news. I remember my youth years. Like, I was in university, my last years of high school when Rwanda and Bosnia wars happened. So, you know, that had a huge impact, of course. And I started being very interested in democracy. I was in political philosophy, and you know, I loved all these theoretical models and like how sophisticated things can be. But then you just put on the TV and you see that, you know, we are so far away from that. So as I was like kind of thinking about all these things, I had the opportunity to take a class on transitional justice. That was in the early days in which transitional justice was starting to be a subject of a study, and I just discovered that's just all what I want to do in my life. And then I had the opportunity to keep working on that issue, and even more so the opportunity to do an internship in the International Center for Transitional Justice when I was just not even knowing what an NGO was or what kind of work would be done. And that's the moment I decided, you know, like I still thought, and for me this is very important because like I really wanted to be an academic, and I still think that research is fundamental. And you know, like as a philosopher, if you study Kant, well, you don't need to have this practical exposure. But if you're studying human rights, I think it's like something that you need to connect necessarily. I think practitioners need research, serious, rigorous research to guide their work. But at the same time, I think that researchers need to be connected with the real work of practitioners to produce research that it's independent, it's like academic standards, but it's also relevant to that and does resonate with that, and it's not like completely, you know, disconnected from what is in the field. So I don't know, it's like, you know, I just someday said, well, this is just what I want to do, and I couldn't not do it, you know. There's
So as a student that may be wanting to ask you, that's interested, you know, like you saying, interested about what's happening in the world, and of this studying or thinking to get into this area of prevention of mass atrocity can seem very overwhelming.
Yeah.
So as a student, what are things that I should do during my time in university, and as I'm looking to explore what to do after that? What sort of advice would you give to me?
Yeah. I mean, this is a very overwhelming topic, and you cannot think about it in the broad terms. You can also don't think about it about how am I going to contribute or how am I going to make like direct impact, because we are just individuals and we cannot just bring change about by ourselves. You have to see this as a more like global movement of people all over the world, some of them in very difficult circumstances, people who are threatened every day, and they actually, some of them don't have a choice not to fight for their rights, and that we are contributing to something in which there's much more people that is part of this thing. In terms of students and what can be done, and you know, again, going back to what moves people and what interests people, and this is something we work a lot with our program in Brazil with high school students. There is one of the topics we work on, it's citizenship. What does it mean to be a good citizen? And I always say this. You know, there is not a model of what being a good citizen is. You don't have to say, oh, everybody has to be, you know, contributing and campaigning to save the world, because that's not what resonates to everybody for different reasons. It may be because they think they cannot do it, or because that's not something that interests them specifically, and that's okay. You know, it's not like, oh, you have to be like that or you have to do that. But I think there's many ways in which people can become responsible citizens, from decided what you buy, what you don't buy in the grocery store, from being respectful to the people you interact with every day, treating well everybody, to actually researching and learning more about this topic, being an informed citizen, reading newspapers, entering critical debates, to, if you want, like take a cause and raise funds or do voluntary work. There's many ways in which you can contribute to make this world a better place, and it doesn't have to be, oh yes, I'm going to save it, I'm going to be the hero. No, because that's not what everybody wants to do, and that's completely fine.
Thank you. So I guess in terms of wrapping up, I'm curious if you could tell us about some of the current challenges and potentially some of the current successes that you're seeing within the field of prevention.
Well, these are difficult times for the prevention world. As I was telling you, when I was in high school, university, it was the years in which we saw Rwanda and we saw Bosnia and well, the ex-Yugoslavia. And still at that point, there was like also the moment in which international law was creating new frameworks, new things were being raised. There was the creation of the ICC, so it was a moment of hope. Like we were seeing that there was many things that were progressing. Whatever progress means, it's a very complicated word. Nowadays, it's actually the contrary. Like I think that since 2001, especially, like things have been changing in adverse manners. We are seeing conflict raising up again. We are seeing many unjust situations. And I think, and of course that has to do with my special perspective, that education is something that actually may help explain many of the things that are happening, and that makes us question what is the role of education in sustaining democracy now that we see that democratic representative democracies are experiencing a big crisis, which is related to the rise of populist movements, hate speech, also like what the role of new media, how people consume information, how people spread fake news and things like that. And that is for me something that it's making this environment difficult to work. And of course also like in some of the cases governments with which we work that are closing up, and lack of political will, lack of willingness to actually contribute to this agenda, of course, are the most immediate ones. In terms of successes, there's so many levels in which you can talk about success, and there's something like, okay, big numbers, impact, whatever. But going to a classroom and sitting with 16 students or 30 students in a public school in Sao Paulo and discussing with them about things, and having a student in the end come and tell me about like a personal experience and how what we were doing was helping her to understand so many things, very qualitative, micro level. For me, this is really like rewarding. Of course, that's also egoistically rewarding because it makes me feel good, or I have contributed to do this. In the level of or work with public officers, I am seeing that all governments, no matter what, there's a lot of good people inside that are willing to do things and to change this world, and being able to work with them and understand also the constraints they have, and partnering with them to find ways in which we can consolidate this work, and actually starting to work with them as a team. Like, there's places I've been working for 3 years. Now I'm friends with these people. And, that is been how, as I see with AIPR, how we connect with people, do these trainings, and then have people actually working with us hand to hand. I think there's hope. I mean, and that's I mean, I think that we are raising awareness and we are bringing a perspective into some places that is actually very, very rewarding.
Thank you so much. Thank you.